Good afternoon, and welcome to Cuyahoga County's Community Development's Community Reinvestment Advisory Subcommittee meeting. It is Wednesday, February 28th, and it is now approximately 2:11 p.m. Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll, please.
As a reminder to all in attendance, this meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll for Ms. Stevens.
Present.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent. Ms. Anderson.
Present.
Mr. Gary Benjamin.
Present.
Ms. Blackwell. Ms. Blackwell is absent. Ms. Blue Donald.
Present.
Ms. Martin O'Toole.
Present.
Mr. Nowak. Mr. Nowak is absent. Mr. Siren.
Present.
Ms. Wheelo is absent. And Mr. Zone is absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there any public comment this afternoon?
No, Madam Chair, no one has signed in.
Okay. Do we have minutes to approve? I did not get a chance to look at them carefully. Did someone else in the room get a chance to look at them carefully? Okay, can I have a motion from the floor, please? Is there a second?
Second.
Hearing no opposition or conversation, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, the minutes are approved. Okay. So today, we have no new items referred to committee, but we do have a discussion and presentation. Mr. Ford, you have colored inside and outside the lines with your study and evaluation of what we're doing.
It's in color.
So would you like to begin your presentation?
Yes. So let me just a few things to say before I go into it. At our last meeting, I think that one of the big things that stood out for me was as we talked about the difference between the market conditions in 2021 and 2022. Interest rates for home mortgages went up significantly in 2022. In fact, I can quickly tell you, in 2021, the rates for a 30-year mortgage, this is national average from Freddie Mac, was 2.96. I don't have that in the presentation, but if you want to make a note, 2021, 2.96. In 2022, 5.34. So not quite double, but a significant increase. And what that led to was a decline in applications. People just weren't looking to borrow at that kind of rate. So we had a decline in applications across the board with all lenders.
Hold on just a second. You said 2022 and 2023?
No, I didn't get to 2023 yet.
All right.
Actually,
I'm jumping ahead of you.
But that's okay. It's not in the presentation also, but interest rates have continued to stay high in 2023. So we're likely to see, when we get the data for 2023, which may not be until this summer, we're likely to see also a reduction of applications, and that means a reduction in loans. And as Kevin Nowak pointed out at our last meeting, something important, he said, well, if we use the method we were talking about using, where we look at the number of loans a bank makes in a year, and I'll use KeyBank or Huntington just as an example, the number of loans they made, this is off the top of my head, so I may not have it exactly right. In 2021, the number of loans they made to black borrowers, 350. The following year, because of the reduction in applications and the reduction in loans, they made 133. So that on the face of it, that looks terrible. If we had set a goal for banks, if we used the 350 and we might have said, well, we think they should do higher. Let's do 375 or something, or at least maintain that level. There's no way they could have done it because the interest rates were keeping people from applying. So that led us to a discussion, well, what's an equitable way to measure, to suggest to the county administration that in their banking services contracts, which I think all believe are going to be KeyBank, Huntington, PNC, and U.S. Bank, assuming that's the likely to happen, that what would be the benchmarks we'd want to suggest for improvement to be seen over the 4-year period of the contract, or at least not anything dropping. And if we just used a simple number of loans, we could run into the same situation. Well, we're almost certainly going to, well, as I said, in 2023, interest rates were high. But going forward into 24 through 24, 25, 26, 27, we could find the same thing happening. Or maybe it's a repeat of a pandemic, some external factor that keeps applications low and therefore keeps loans low. The two things that were discussed, there were more than two, but the two big ones were the idea of some market share. So market share of all loans made by all lenders. What is the market share of any one of these four banks? And should that be, they should be able to maintain that even if their numbers go down. Everybody's numbers went down. Do they at least keep their relative position or possibly increase within that position? The second one was the idea of a market share. They reloan a market share of the deposits that they're holding. And I've always actually, I've been doing research on deposits. I think it's important to show that there's an inequity sometimes where the amount of deposits a bank is holding, they may not be reloaning. There's an expectation we might want to have that should they be reloaning more. But as a benchmark, I'm not sure it works. And when I go through this presentation, I can say why. And I'm also prepared to say I could be wrong because I think we're all trying to figure this out.
I think it is a logical place to begin, but there may be, I agree with you that when we cannot control the market, where interest rates are going to go, where insurance costs are going to go, then there are factors that the banks cannot control either.
Right.
In their lending. And we know that in 2023, at the year end, we were still having people borrow at 7.9%. And so if that's the case, even when they were banks who said they had a commitment to do some activities in the core city and the inner ring suburbs, and we see them lending at that high rate, then we're going to look at average market interest rates that are almost 3 times what we saw during the pandemic year. So that will reduce the number of borrowers who are interested in buying, unless they've got everything else in place. And I suppose if you'd shrunk your budget so that you had enough income for certain levels of mortgage, even though it's a higher interest rate, you'd be prepared to refinance in maybe 5 years. So let's talk about what you found in your analysis.
Can we screen share there we go, or almost, there we go. So one thing to point out is I've got a little note there that this research represents preliminary findings subject to the final report. And this is only a small portion of the final report that I will be submitting to County Council. And I believe I think the plan is that I will present the draft of that to this committee at the next month's meeting. At the end of last month's meeting, I did ask, would it be useful for the group if I were to do some market share analysis? And I think the answer was yes. I'm also going to show you a couple things briefly. I did do some work on deposits because I do it every year anyway, and I thought maybe I should update that. And then I did something new where I looked at applications and rejection rates for the 4 banks. I could do it for every bank in the county, but since we're focused on these 4. So the deposit analysis, one interesting thing is that deposits have been increasing over the last 6 years pretty steadily and from more than double. These are deposits reported to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is required by law that every bank, every depository bank, has to report those deposits. This is the breakdown of looking at, this is the 7 banks that I've been looking at for several years and sharing with you research. These 7 banks have one thing in common. They are all They all have some type of community benefit agreement, either with a national organization or they have a community benefit plan where they've pledged to do better. And by and large, the 6 of those banks, they've stayed the same. Their deposits have not really increased. KeyBank's deposits have quadrupled from 15. It's actually, I believe that should be, I should have, oh yeah, I do down at the bottom. I've got the parens with 3 zeros, closed parens. That means whatever you are reading here, these numbers, you got to add 3 zeros. So it's 15 billion in 2018, and it's 60 billion in 2023. I think it'd be interesting to have a conversation with KeyBank as to where does that come from. I know that in previous years, I was at a meeting once with KeyBank where they said that it's high because they have all their corporate deposits factored in. I actually don't know what they mean by that. All I know is that every bank must report to the FDIC. This is what's been reported to the FDIC as to the deposits that are being held by each of these 7 banks. I'm going to go to the next one. So these are the dollars. This is the market share. So as you can see, KeyBank started the 6-year period with about a quarter of the market share. They've ended the 6-year period in 2023 with a little more than half of all the deposits coming from Cuyahoga County. That's individuals, businesses, and of course, governments, money that the county puts on deposit, or a city or a suburb. The last thing here, and just about 2 hours ago, I realized that there's an error, and I want to point it out to you. I've actually corrected the PowerPoint so you can get the fixed one. It can be sent around to you. But the dollars loaned, the next to the last column on the right, just to take an example, you see Huntington about 4th down says 706, and that would be 706 million in this case. It's actually 377, so it's about half. 377,195. And that is true for pretty much every number in that next to the last column. The dollars that were loaned back to the county from the deposits that are held. So that also means that the percent of deposits in the last column is actually even lower. So Huntington's is 4.2 instead of 7.9. KeyBank's, instead of being 0.47, is, instead of
0.9.
Yes, instead of that, it's 0.47. So I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I think that,
What was the dollar amount for because they're at the top?
the dollar amount for the KeyBank reloaned is 236,855, and then the 3 zeros.
How did you make that mistake?
I can tell you exactly how I made that mistake. Okay. So with the complex, the number of tables and graphs that I do every year, which could literally be 50 or 60 or more, instead of creating a brand new one, what I do is I use one from the previous year as the template for the next year, and then I put the data in. In this particular case, I didn't fill in that data. So I'm admitting to the entire world and the universe that watches YouTube. But that's why I
picked up the old data.
Yes, it's why I have on the very front this research is preliminary and subject to further review. So this is still a draft. My goal is, of course, to have the final product to the county be correct in every respect. So I don't mind being candid about so. But the reason I wanted to stay for a moment on this is because it's what I've noticed is that again, I'm going to use Huntington as an example. In 2021, Huntington's deposits were about 8.8 billion. In 22, they were 8.9 billion. They didn't change that much. If we used as a benchmark market share or percent of loans they made to their deposits, because the loans went down, it's not gonna really help us. if we're looking for something that is equitable as a benchmark, so if we'd want to say, and I guess the perfect example here is that, back to this, you see where Huntington's, I just told you, Huntington's percent of deposits they reloaned is 4.2. It previously was 7.9. That would look like, if we'd set that as a goal, it would like, oh my God, they didn't do very well. They made only half. The difference between that and using a market share of loans made in the county is that if all loans came down, then each individual bank within that should be able to maintain their position or possibly even increase their position. And I'm certainly open to a different interpretation of this. And maybe should I just go on and then let me just do that. Let's go through this a little further. So this is, this is real quick, something I did. I thought this might be interesting looking at, I go too far. Looking at rejection rates from the 4 banks. Well, first looking at the applications. Huntington did get the highest number of applications amongst the 4 banks. That's the first column. They had the highest number of white applications and black and total applications. The percent of applications that were black, 18%, is actually not the highest, but the number of loans originated to blacks is the highest. Their rejection rate for blacks is 12%, which is the lowest. Although, interestingly, their ratio of rejection of white to black, theirs is 3 times, the blacks are rejected 3 times more often than whites. My thought about that, I mean, that used to be something that was looked at 10, 20 years ago very heavily. I think the bottom line, though, is that they are rejecting all their applicants more often than the other 3 banks. So if you consider, they tend to approve both white and black borrowers more frequently than the other 3 banks. I may have misstated this. Yeah, their rejection rate is lower, therefore they approve more white and black borrowers both. And I probably should have just stuck with the notes at the bottom there. This is number 2, in spite of the fact that Huntington's rejection rate for blacks is 3 times higher than for whites, their rejection rate for blacks, 12%, is still lower than the other rejection rate for the other 3. The number 3 note, Huntington receives significantly more applications for both white and black borrowers than the other 3 banks, possibly due, and this is just theory, possibly due to more aggressive marketing, reputational goodwill, or other factors. In fact, I think that we should consider that what you want from any bank you're partnering with, this county's partnering with, is you want them to be aggressive in reaching out to underserved communities and doing marketing to pull people in. Number 4, Huntington made 3 to 4 times the number of loans to black borrowers than the other 3 banks. And 5, in 2022, all 4 banks were dealing with the same adverse market conditions, a rise in interest rates, which led to a decline in home purchase loan applications for all lenders operating in the county. To me, what this suggests is, so we have 4 banks all facing the same adverse conditions, yet Huntington somehow finds a way to reach out, bring more people in, and make more loans. I mean, this is the kind of thing I think we want to see from all banks, is to make a greater effort. I'm going to keep going because I'm worried about time here. So this is the market share analysis that I said I would do, and I've got this in categories. I know that we talked about the possibility at the last meeting of, well, do we just have one benchmark over the county, which could be home purchase loans countywide, which this represents. I would still recommend that the benchmarks be set for types of loans, home purchase, home repair, loans under 50,000, loans under 100,000, and also by geography. I still think that's worth doing. Let's take a look at it here. In this first one, also to point out what I did, this is the first time I've ever done this analysis, so this may get tweaked by the time you see it next month. What I chose to do, because I couldn't fit everything on the page, I chose to put whoever the leader was, whoever was the market leader, put them, or if there's two of them, before we get to the four banks being focused on. The four banks are in the left column, highlighted in red font. So cross country with a 9.8 share, Cuyahoga-wide, 9.8% is the market leader. Third Federal's next at 9.1, and Huntington's at 5.5. The other three banks are less than half that. If you look at the Cleveland market share, cross country's 10, Third Federal's about 5, Huntington is 6. Actually, this is a case where Huntington's rank is, I sorted these by the left column. So Huntington is actually the second highest market share in the county for loans overall, home purchase loans overall in Cleveland. Then the east side of Cleveland, cross country is again the leader. Third Federal drops to the 8th position. Huntington is again 7th with a 7.2% market share. And again, Key, PNC, and U.S. Bank are about half that or less than half that. And then looking at the east inner suburbs, cross country is again the leading bank with the highest market share of home purchase loans at 12.6%. Third Federal has dropped down to 6th. They're at 3.8, and then Huntington again is second highest market share at 5.8. Key Bank is 11th at 2.2, and again the other three have a relatively lower position. I'm going to keep going because again, in the interest of time, the next thing I did was home repair loans. The same format. I used Cuyahoga, Cleveland, East Side, and East Inner Suburbs. If you look at the Cuyahoga one, actually, if you look at all four, in this particular case, Huntington is the highest market share of home improvement loans, and countywide, Cleveland, east side of Cleveland, or east inner suburbs. Key Bank here, except for countywide, is their number 2 in Cleveland, and they're number 2 in east side of Cleveland, and they still rank fairly high at number 3 in the east inner suburbs. So this is where I think we've noted this before, that while Key Bank may not be a leader in home purchase loans, and there might be a hope or expectation that they would improve their position, they actually have done fairly well with home repair. Although going historically, they were even higher 5 or 6 years ago. So they have dropped some, but they've maintained a fairly high position. Again, the other two banks, PNC and U.S. Bank, have relatively lower market shares. And so if you think about, as we're going forward, what my suggestion is going to be, that any bank that's a leader in market share, the expectation of the county over the next 4 years might be they at least maintain that market share regardless of market conditions and maybe improve it. For the lenders who are partnering that are not leaders, they're not a leader in market share, the expectation might be that they increase their market share, again, which would be relatively immune from using this method, immune from interest rates or any other factors that would cause applications and loans to go down, because we're talking about their share, their percentage of the loans being made. I'm going to go to the next one, black borrowers. And I did this across the board. This is not something that I've done, I do it countywide because black borrowers could be wherever. Cross country is number 1, Huntington is number 2, Key Bank is ranked 12th at market share. PNC and U.S. Bank are lower. Market share for cross country is 13%. That's the highest. Huntington is 6%. And then the other three banks are about half that or less. Skipping now to low moderate income borrowers. Similar pattern. Cross country is first at 12% share. Huntington at 6.3%. And then the other three banks are about half that. Let me stop there. I do want to talk a few more minutes about small dollar loans, but I could stop here, or do you want me to continue? I'm almost done.
Go ahead.
Okay. So small dollar loans, I want to say, this maybe isn't necessary to repeat it, but I thought this chart showing east side and west side of Cleveland is informative as to why small dollar loans are still critically important. One of the more interesting things, if you look at 2005, the median sale price on the east side of Cleveland and west side was only $9,000 apart. $89,000 on the west side, $80,000 on the east side. And they were close in the years leading up to that. Then we get the foreclosure crisis, massive volumes of foreclosure, abandonment, blight, and everything drops across the board, both east and west side, but notice the drop is much greater on the east side. And the most significant thing is the recovery. The west side of Cleveland has not only had a recovery from where their peak was, but they're at 41,000 beyond the pre-foreclosure point. The east side of Cleveland, the median, and this is very recent data as of December 2023, the median for the east side is 55,000, still 25,000 underwater. So half of the loans on the east side of Cleveland, 1 to 3 family, arm's length sales. These are not foreclosure sales. These are not gifts and transactions between people that know each other. These are arm's length sales. Half of them are below 55. And we know from other research I may have shown you that investors are coming in and paying cash for a lot of that. So they're competing, they're out competing people if people can't get loans. I'm going to go to the next one. This is the only other one I did. I thought the east inner suburbs would also be interesting. While the prices, some of this surprised me, by the way. While prices in Shaker, University Heights, and Cleveland Heights continued to increase in 2023, and generally there's an upswing here, which is good. Prices in South Euclid, Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, and Warrensville leveled off. If you look at the very last year, those trend lines for those communities, starting with South Euclid and going down, have leveled off. Warrensville Heights actually has dropped a little bit. And so more than half of the homes in Maple Heights and Warrensville, for example, are selling for $100,000, which represents affordable homeownership opportunities if loans under $100,000 are available. One of the things that we talked about was the previous benchmark I had used for defining small dollar loans was $50,000. And I think that made sense several years ago. And it still makes sense for the city of Cleveland, for the east side. It doesn't make sense, except for maybe East Cleveland, it doesn't really make sense for the other suburbs, which is why I agreed that I would change or add a $100,000 benchmark. So I'm proposing that I continue to do both, because in the city of Cleveland, I think you have to still look at the 50 and below, but I think otherwise 100 and below is the benchmark for the inner ring suburbs. Let's see. Market share of loans 100,000 or less. So this is new. Haven't done this before. Cross country, no surprise, is again number 1. Huntington is number 2 countywide. PNC, KeyBank, and US Bank are same pattern. They're about half the market share of Huntington. In the city of Cleveland, it's very similar. Huntington is second. There's a little bit of a shift between PNC, Key, and US Bank as to what their position is, but their relative market share among the 4 banks that the county's considering, their market share is about half. East side of Cleveland, Huntington is second with a 6.8% share. Again, the other 3 banks are about half that. East inner suburbs here, and actually I didn't make a note of who was the second rank, and I'm not sure. I just know that it's not PNC, KeyBank, or US Bank. You can see that their relative positions are actually very low. Their rank is PNC 28th, KeyBank 20th, and US Bank 34th. Their market share of loans 100,000 or less is significantly low in the east inner suburbs. Last one I was going to show you is the 50,000 and less. Now here the top 2 and 3 shifts a little. So in the Cuyahoga County, Fairway Independent Mortgage is number 1. Huntington's number 2. If you go to Cleveland, it's the same. Fairway Independent's number 1 and Huntington's number 2. The east side of Cleveland, Fairway Independent is actually First Federal of Lakewood is number 1 and Huntington's number 3. And then east inner suburbs, Fairway Independent's number 1 and Huntington's number 4. The pattern with the shares is similar. As I've shown before, Huntington is in Cuyahoga County 8.9% share, and the other 3 banks the county's looking to partner with are less than half that. And in the city of Cleveland, it's 12.3% for Huntington, and the other 3 banks are actually a quarter or less of that. East side of Cleveland, Huntington's share is 10%. The other 3 banks is, again, 25% or less. Eastern suburbs, Huntington is 4th at 6%, and the other 3 are less. So what I guess I'm suggesting is that I think market share of all loans made is, the benefit is that if all loans made come down for whatever external factors, that what you're hoping is that each lender you're partnering with, the county's partnering with, will at least maintain their proportional share within that framework. And arguably, if they're doing something special, if they're trying to improve, they can actually increase that market share. And we should keep in mind the 4 lenders the county is looking to partner with are among the 7 lenders that have all made national community benefits plans or agreements pledging that they're going to do better. So I think that's worth keeping in mind as well. I know this was a lot. How much time did it take to do that? Well, maybe.
It took 30 minutes.
Oh,
But
could have tried to do less. But
it's important. Okay, now we begin to ask questions.
yeah.
I will let my colleagues go first. Who is raising their hand first?
Did I stun everybody with too much data?
No, not this
Through the
group.
chair, I think I'm just a little flabbergasted at the market share of Key compared to the lending. Actually,
Yes.
it made my jaw drop.
Oh, you mean the money that they have in deposits compared to what they lend in
Correct.
this marketplace? Well, one of the things that continues to inspire me to pursue this course of work is that we're doing business, and this pertains to all of the lenders who are on the list in front of us. There's an asset that Cuyahoga County and the city of Cleveland and all of the communities, the 59 jurisdictions that we provide support to as county government. That asset is our residential uses of land. It is the predominant way to bring in incomes for our schools, a small amount for our libraries, a small amount for the individual municipalities. The investment that these lenders make back into that asset is what helps us have future income, not just next year or the following year, but the long-term income for when all of us retire. And we're hoping that our public schools will still be open, that our municipalities will still have some income to pick up the garbage and make sure that the water operates correctly. And it is incumbent of folks like us to encourage them to continue to help our constituents invest in those assets and make them valuable long-term for the future. So this data helps us understand how individual lenders work to help these assets be of value into the future. And so I'm glad to see their market shares, and I'm glad to see them invest in single-family home sales and in the repair of those single-family homes. This is incredibly important for us to understand how the public sector continues to have healthy communities. So if people out there are wondering why we spent over 3 years looking at this kind of stuff, it's simply because it's all about the future, especially since I've decided I'm not running for office anymore. This is like kind of my piece to make sure that I made some type of impact on the long-term future. So help me articulate this to the administration and to our communities and to the lenders, why the work they do to lend back in these 4 categories that we've collectively said is important. It's important for a real reason. That is the future of Cuyahoga County. So, Ms. Martin O'Toole, your comment or question for Frank is?
It's more of a comment than a question. What's the role of the regulator?
Yeah, the regulators, national regulators like the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Well, they do evaluations of depository banks and their performance in meeting credit needs. I'm not sure they all do it on the same frequency. They don't do it every year. And I have to tell you that I'm not entirely sure what the benchmarks are that they use, but I would be willing to bet that market share is one of those. So I may be an insufficient answer for you, but
I guess my point is there a role for this body in
to engage?
engaging with the
Actually,
regulator?
I think so.
Yeah.
So we have a Federal Reserve Office not a mile from here.
And comptrollers here.
And the comptroller has an office
Yeah.
here. And the Federal Home Loan Bank has an office in Cincinnati. All three of those partner to try and make sure that we have regular participation. And so I would say that there is a next step for us to present these and ask that they strongly encourage lenders in every marketplace to do more to help maintain the assets of our communities. So I think we need to polish this up and create a cover letter that goes to leadership at each of those three places, the Federal Home Loan Bank, the Federal Reserve, and the Office of the Comptroller. What are y'all thinking?
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just a quick question. This is not something that I think we've necessarily discussed previously, but I'm wondering if there is any role, and you see this sometimes with broadband service, that the public sector, where the private market is not meeting the needs of a community, the public sector may step in. Is there any role, or do you know of any examples of other jurisdictions that have begun a project of public banking?
Yeah.
And how that might influence this?
And in recent years, at least the last 5 years or so, there's been quite a bit of discussion on a national level. I think there only are a couple examples of public banks owned by communities. I know that in San Francisco, they've been debating this. I don't know if they ended up doing it or not. And I can't remember where the other place was where they actually have done it. There was a forum here in Cleveland, this might be about a year ago, co-sponsored by Organize Ohio and Cleveland State University, and one of the lead, they had people from San Francisco, they had a panel of like 3 or 4 people. It might be worth having a speaker come in and just give a little presentation on that to this group as well.
Well, in addition to those endeavors, I think that one of the reasons that CDFIs were created was to, while they were not responsible to a public entity, they had a public purpose. And so in Cuyahoga County, CHN Housing Partners has a CDFI. Greater Cleveland Partnership has a CDFI. I think there are 4, but I can't remember who the other 2 are. Ms. Blood? Yes, they are CDFI, and are you thinking there are 4 as well?
Madam Chair, because I'm thinking who's local. We actually convened a meeting because Enterprise has a CDFI, although we're not local, it's national. There was a meeting a couple of months ago with all the CDFIs, IFF, but I don't know if we consider those
They're
local.
Chicago-based.
Right. Right, they're not based
Everybody
here.
who operates in this market came
Right.
together.
Yes.
Okay.
To discuss
But
a
the,
variety of things.
the ones that I remember being based here, though, are CHN Housing Partners, Village Cap, Greater Cleveland Partners, but there's somebody else.
I'm looking at ohiocdfis.org
Okay.
right now. So just working through this list, we've got Western Reserve Community Fund, which is based in Northeast Ohio.
Okay.
Village Capital, let's see. Yeah. LISC has an office here now, apparently, or they're listed as based partially.
They've had
in-
one for a while.
Yeah, but that's like us because we're listed.
They're like Enterprise.
And then it looks like Cleveland Development Advisors is Northeast Ohio-based,
That's the
CHN.
partnership.
Yeah. So those are the ones that are listed
Okay.
here. So it's CHN, CDA.
And then, of course, the Western Reserve in the Western Reserve Development Finance Authority in Akron is also a CDFI. So we have 4 that are based in Northeast Ohio that can lend in a much more proactive way. And I know that CHN has focused on doing single-family loans and repairs. And they have received investments from both Huntington and Key in the CDFI. So those kinds of activities are incredibly important, but we need to see more because the CDFIs have much smaller portfolios and much smaller investments, but they're a piece of the solution. And when we can get the CDFIs to be more proactive, then their investor banks should also be willing to be more proactive in the marketplace. Next question, because I wrote down a note on having a discussion about public banking next. That'll be some new homework for staff and our consultant to do.
And I can find the names of the people who did present previously.
And we could get your list as well for the regional CDFIs that met.
Sure.
Dakota is the only public bank in the United States.
I think that's correct. I knew it was somewhere northwest, but I couldn't remember. Yeah.
Is it owned by the state? Or is it owned by?
Publicly owned by the state, I believe.
Okay.
I think you said something, Chair, a moment ago, a piece of the solution.
I think
That's
several.
the key, because we do want to be careful that we don't look at CDFIs and public banks as, oh, that's the answer. Because, and just the mere fact that some of the local banks do invest in CHN, which they should, doesn't mean they shouldn't also be maintaining their level of meeting credit needs on their own.
Madam Chair, to
Yes.
Mr. Ford, is there any way we really can drill down to the increase in deposits? It's just such, if I go to page 5, such an increase. And I'm just curious why. Like, if there's a report, it just feels like it's doubled since 2021.
I agree that that's something that should be, maybe it's a direct question to KeyBank.
So we ask a direct
Yeah,
question.
I know that there was a meeting that I know I was at, Director Martin O'Toole was at, Barbara Anderson was at. This goes back to 2017 that GCRC had with KeyBank. And what was raised to them was the disparity between their share of the loans they were making, and here they have all these deposits. It wasn't even that high back in 2017, but there was a disparity. Their answer was, well, this is inaccurate or it's misleading because these are our corporate deposits. I may be not phrasing it exactly as they said it, but that was 2017. And now we've got this tremendous increase. And again, this is what they report to the FDIC. It's their numbers. But I think it'd be useful to ask them, where's it coming from? What explains it? And I think it's a
Yes.
very good question.
Madam
Yeah.
Chair, to Mr. Ford, because, or to everyone, because it elicits a different response in thinking about what the expectations are of whomever.
Yeah.
Considering how much whatever financial institution has on deposit in our county. And for it to be such a stark difference, and then the market share also being such a stark difference, it just begs to, it feels like it needs further explanation. Thank you.
Do we know if the treasurer asked that type of question to Ms. Mason or Mr. McLear?
What I could do also is I can cut and paste or put into an email or an attachment the actual page from the FDIC that shows all the lenders and shows all this.
I want to do an internal request before we call Key.
Okay.
Or email Key or send them a letter. Mr. McClear, could you reach out to the treasurer's office? They may have asked that in their current research. Okay. I love these questions. Next. Okay, you know how I feel about an hour. We have achieved our hour, ladies and gentlemen. We have had good research. We have great questions to follow up on. So we have some homework for the next meeting. Anything else that we need to cover before we move? I want to do, yes, go ahead.
I don't know if this is appropriate. I know that critical mass can be useful in influencing organizations to do things. I'm wondering if there's room for a brief set of recommendations. Just from my perspective as a mayor of a small community, how can we change our practices to complement any changes that might be made
So
at the county or regional?
recommendations, since we have 3 mayors on the committee, recommendations to communities
Is a thought.
for how to enhance their relationships with lenders. We could spend some time at our next meeting on that. I do want to remind folks that one of our goals this year was to make recommendations to the administration about how the new contract should be shaped. I think that we have had an impact on that, and council hopes to see recommendations for agreements or an agreement. I don't know exactly how it will be handled, but I'm thinking the business will maybe parceled out. And so the reality is that we have come to near conclusions, but there is a presentation I'd like to see go before the full Community Development Committee of Council, as well as us having some recommendations for the communities that exist in Cuyahoga County. I think that is a great recommendation. I was just going to do it as a sidebar, but maybe we could have our working group do some recommendations. And Frank, you could polish that up for us.
Chair Stevens, if there's 15 seconds, can I just point out one quick thing that I didn't
Absolutely.
get to? Sharon, could you display the PowerPoint one more time? It was right there. The last thing I did, and I didn't get to it, was just recommendations from me to you. And the paragraph, it opens with addressing this question about variations in loan output that may result from year-to-year market changes. And I've got 3 examples at the bottom. Example 1 is the 4-year expectation for a lender that's already a market leader in a specific category would be to maintain that high level in that category during the contract period and improve if possible. The second one is 4-year expectation for a lender that is not a market leader in a specific category would be to continually improve during the contract period to reach a greater market share. I didn't make any suggestion as to what that target market share is. The third thing was just something worth noting that I think it's worth, and I did speak to Treasurer Cromus about this, requiring, if requiring would be better, each bank to provide their HMDA data at least on an annual basis before it's not available. They have to turn it in by March 30th, I think, or 31st, but we don't get it till like September, August. But they have it. They actually have it. They could give it to us after June.
They could voluntarily.
They could voluntarily show it to us, yeah, with caveats saying, well, it's not, it's a draft or whatever, but it's something that could be studied, and then that would help us identify, help the county identify, are there ways that in, say, the final 6 months of the year, could they do business differently? Could they make some adjustments? Thank you for giving me, probably was more than 15 seconds, but.
Okay. In for a little bit, in for a lot,
Yeah.
Okay, folks, any last comments before we close this meeting? As usual, I want to thank you for your work on behalf of our constituents collectively. I think this is record-breaking work, especially, Frank, the data that you provided to us give us substance in the kinds of things we ask people to look at and do. And coming up with some kind of reminder or recommendations for the communities we serve to look at how they invest. For example, with Cleveland Heights, the deposits and the annual operating revenues. The annual operating revenues exceed $45 million, and with all the other additional investments and bond issuance, et cetera, and if there's a construction project, it could be as much as $70 million that the city of Cleveland Heights is dealing with. So those overnight deposits are substantive. And so the kinds of questions you ask lenders as you enter into agreements with them, it's important because aggregately throughout our 59 communities, it becomes a large substantive number if every council and every mayor are saying, what have you done lately? Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to thank you for giving stature to the work that so many of us have tried for years to bring to better attention, and you've done it. So thank you for that.
Well, I've been part of the team for a very long time. So this is, this service on county council was my chance to help shine the light on something that is incredibly important that a lot of folks overlook. If you don't invest in our housing units today, what will they look like 5 to 10 years from now? And what will they be valued at 5 to 10 years from now? So any lender who doesn't help us do better has helped us do less. That means that our base value, what we generate for something as important as education in Ohio, is less and less. And so they wouldn't recommend a broker who helped them earn less money over time. And so we won't recommend lenders that help us make less money over time. I'm using their business principles to evaluate what we do as part of this committee. If there are no further questions or comments, I want to thank you all for your visit this week. Next month's meeting, Ms. Mason, is when? Madam Clerk?
March 27th.
So on March 27th, I look forward to seeing all of you in this room or the one next door. Thank you again, and this meeting is adjourned.